The man who makes a woman his world will find his world crumbling the moment she walks away.
Hey guys, tonight we're talking about something most men feel in their gut, but rarely put into words. You've been there. Things started off electric, her eyes lit up when you walked into the room, and every text from her felt like a rush. But somewhere along the way, that spark dimmed. She still smiles, but it's thinner now. The hugs last just a little shorter. Her phone seems to claim more of her attention than you do. You tell yourself it's stress, or maybe you're imagining things. But deep down, you can feel the shift. Here's the truth. This moment, this slow, almost invisible fade, is the exact point where most men get blindsided. They mistake it for a minor mood change, a temporary lull, when in reality, it's the start of something much bigger. And if you don't see it for what it is, you're in for a brutal awakening. Because by the time you notice it clearly, she's already halfway out the door emotionally. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, drop your location and local time. Let's see just how far tonight's conversation travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You see, this isn't just your problem. It's older than you. Older than your father, your grandfather. Older than the modern world itself. Men across centuries have written about it in letters, whispered it to friends, and carried it in silence. The Greeks knew it. The Victorians knew it. And one man, Sigmund Freud, dared to give it a name. But his conclusion? Let's just say it didn't survive long in polite society. It starts with this unspoken fear. You're not enough anymore. Maybe you were once. Maybe in the early days, you were the adventure, the unknown, the spark she couldn't resist. But as she learns more about you, as the mystery erodes, so does a part of her attraction. It's not that she dislikes you. It's that something in her brain recalibrates. And Freud argued that this recalibration is not only inevitable, but rooted in a primal survival mechanism. Imagine attraction like a fire. In the beginning, the flames leap high. Every little thing you do, your laugh, your presence, your attention, acts like oxygen. But over time, if the air becomes too still, the fire doesn't just burn steady. It starts to smother. The heat drops, the flames shrink, and one day you realize you're staring at embers. The shock here is that it's not about what you did wrong in the moment. It's about the nature of the bond itself. Freud suggested that once a woman feels she has a man, when there's no uncertainty left, her brain unconsciously begins to deprioritize him as a source of excitement. That's not malice. It's biology. And while modern culture likes to frame relationships as stable havens, history tells a harsher story. Stability and desire often fight each other. If you've ever felt her attention drift and told yourself, it's just a phase, you've missed the real danger. Because what Freud uncovered was that this shift is rarely a phase, it's a progression. And unless you know how to interrupt it, the end is only a matter of time. In the next section, we're going to dig into why Freud's band observation was so threatening, not just to romantic ideals, but to the very image of love society wanted to protect. And once you hear it, you'll understand why this theory was quietly buried for decades. You probably think you've heard every theory about relationships, compatibility, love languages, attachment styles. But Freud's band observation? It was different. It didn't comfort. It didn't flatter. It didn't hand out neat little solutions tied up with pop psychology ribbons. Instead, it pointed to something raw and unsettling, that in the very nature of sexual attraction, there's a built-in timer, especially in how women relate to men once desire is secured. Here's what makes it so volatile. Freud, in his early lectures and private correspondence, hinted at a pattern he'd seen in countless cases. Women, once emotionally and physically satisfied in the early stages, often began to lose sexual interest, not slowly over decades, but sometimes shockingly fast. He saw it in marriages, in mistresses, even in women who swore deep love. The trigger? Not betrayal, not abuse, Not boredom with a man's personality, but the loss of psychological tension, that intoxicating mix of uncertainty and pursuit that fuels the first flames. Now, think about the social climate of Freud's time, the late 1800s and early 1900s. Respectable society was built on the ideal of lifelong devotion, women as moral anchors, and men as steady providers. To suggest that attraction itself was wired to fade, no matter how good the man, was heresy. It undermined not just marriage, but the entire romantic narrative. So while Freud hinted at it in his writings, it was often couched in clinical language, buried in papers on psychical impotence and the Madonna whore complex. But in private, he was more blunt. He told colleagues that the very act of achieving intimacy, of becoming emotionally safe, could trigger an unconscious cooling in female desire. It wasn't that women were fickle. It was that, in his words, desire demands distance. And once that distance collapsed, the instinctive hunger could evaporate. You can already see why this idea was dangerous. For men, it meant that being the perfect partner, devoted, predictable, endlessly available, could paradoxically accelerate their own rejection. For women, it suggested that something deeply primal and beyond conscious control might be steering their attraction, making long-term desire an uphill battle. Now fast forward to today. We live in a culture obsessed with keeping things safe and stable. We Leonize comfort as the highest goal in love. But the irony? Comfort kills the very spark people are desperate to preserve. You've probably seen it in your own circle. Relationships that looked unshakable from the outside, until one partner suddenly confessed they just don't feel the same anymore. That's Freud's theory playing out in real life. And here's the kicker. Even though his observation was never officially canonized in mainstream psychology, it keeps resurfacing in evolutionary biology, in dating coaches' advice, in the unspoken rules of modern hookup culture. Different language, same underlying truth. But Freud's real bombshell wasn't just that women's interest could fade. It was when and why, and the way he described it made every man, no matter how confident, suddenly vulnerable. In the next section, we'll zoom in on that moment, the precise tipping point where her interest shifts from hunger to habit. You'll see how it creeps in so subtly that by the time you notice, the emotional chemistry has already rewritten itself. It's almost never a thunderclap. No dramatic fight. No single final straw. The moment her interest begins to die is usually so quiet you miss it entirely. Freud described it as the passing of the erotic ideal into the domestic. Sounds poetic, almost harmless, until you realize what it means. It's that moment when you stop being the mysterious man who stirs her pulse and start being the familiar fixture she knows too well. The problem? Familiarity is a double-edged sword. On one side, it builds trust. On the other, it dulls the thrill that made her drawn to you in the first place. Picture it. At first, she hangs on your every word. She studies the way you move. There's space between you, space for her imagination to fill with desire. But over time, that space closes. She knows your routines, your jokes, your moods. You stop surprising her. And without realizing it, her mind begins to shift from anticipation to assumption. You're no longer the adventure, just the destination she's already reached. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Novelty triggers dopamine. Dopamine fuels desire. But once the brain has mapped you, once it feels there's nothing new to uncover, dopamine drops. And with it, the spark. This isn't about you getting worse. It's about her brain deciding there's no longer a reward in the chase. Freud's danger signal was subtle. She begins engaging with you less as a lover and more as a companion. Watch for small tells. Conversations turn more practical than playful. Her texts become shorter, less urgent. Physical affection feels polite instead of hungry. And here's the cruel twist. These changes often happen while she still loves you. Yes, love can stay while desire drains away. That's why so many men are blindsided. She's still there, but she's not there. You might think the solution is to double down, spend more time together, become more available, prove your devotion. But Freud's observation suggested the opposite, that the very act of closing the gap further could accelerate the fade. Because if the erosion is caused by too much familiarity, then drowning her in more of the same only speeds the process. Look at modern dating culture. How many couples burn hot in the first months, then fizzle by year one? How many marriages turn sexless long before they turn loveless? The symptoms match Freud's tipping point almost exactly. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The moment of shift isn't always conscious for her. She might not even realize her attraction is waning until it's already deep in the decline. That's why the signs are so easy to miss. By the time they're visible, you're already in what Freud might call the cooling stage, and recovery from there is far harder. But if you can spot it early, if you can see the exact moment the balance changes, you have a chance to act before the spiral becomes irreversible. In the next section, we'll get into what happens after that tipping point, how the brain's own chemistry starts working against you, turning the pleasure of closeness into the poison of indifference. So here's where the romance story takes its cruelest turn. After the tipping point, your greatest asset, the emotional closeness you've built, starts quietly working against you. Freud, long before neuroscience could back him up, argued that the human brain has a hardwired response to satiation. In other words, once the hunger is gone, the feast becomes bland. The very things that made her crave you, the long talks, the shared routines, the constant presence, now act like sugar in the bloodstream. At first sweet, then sickly. Think about the early days. Each kiss is a surprise. Each meeting carries that subtle edge of uncertainty. Will she be in the mood? Will the chemistry still hit as hard? That edge is like caffeine for the brain. But when you're always there, always ready, always known, that edge wears down. The dopamine drops, oxytocin holds steady, and what was once a high-voltage current turns into a steady hum. Modern studies on long-term couples reveal a stark pattern. Sexual frequency drops most sharply after the first year, often without any conscious decision. It's not that the relationship is failing, it's that the brain has shifted from seeking mode to maintenance mode. And maintenance mode doesn't flood the body with desire. Here's the twist Freud warned about. Indifference creeps in under the mask of comfort. She still laughs with you. She still says, "I love you." But her eyes don't linger like before. When she touches you, it's affectionate rather than electric. And when you're intimate, it feels more like habit than hunger. You see this in countless modern relationships. Couples post anniversary photos smiling side by side, while quietly living in a state of emotional drought. Social media can hide the truth, but the pattern is the same. The passion fades, the closeness stays, and both partners tell themselves it's normal. But Freud didn't think it was just normal. He saw it as a consequence of biology's cold logic. In evolutionary terms, once a mate was secured and resources were assured, the brain's urgency to maintain high attraction levels dropped. Attraction is costly. It demands energy, focus, emotional vulnerability. Nature doesn't maintain it indefinitely without reason. The uncomfortable part? Once indifference takes root, it can feed on itself. She feels less drawn to you, so she invests less energy into the connection. You feel her withdrawing, so you either cling tighter or withdraw yourself. Both reactions deepen the emotional distance, even if you're physically together. This is where most men lose the game entirely. They sense her pulling back and respond with one of two fatal errors. Overcompensation, flooding her with attention, gifts, and availability. Retreat, withdrawing out of hurt, creating a cold war of silence. Both kill what little spark remains, because neither reintroduces the tension and novelty her attraction once fed on. In the next section, we'll go deeper into one of Freud's most controversial points, that attraction, especially in women, is tied to status in ways most men never suspect. And that status is tested constantly, whether you notice it or not. Here's where Freud's theory shifts from uncomfortable to dangerous, because it threatens the ego of almost every man who hears it. Freud believed that attraction isn't just about physical chemistry or shared values. It's tied, sometimes invisibly, to status. And here's the kicker. Status isn't just your job title, your bank account, or your social circle. It's how she perceives your value in relation to her and to the other men she could theoretically choose. In Freud's case studies, women didn't consciously think, "I'm losing interest because his status dropped." Instead, their attraction subtly shifted after moments when their partner seemed less capable, less in control, or less in demand. He called these silent tests. A silent test is never announced. She doesn't tell you she's evaluating you. It could be as small as how you react when another man interrupts your conversation, how you handle a problem when things go wrong in public, whether you seem to have a mission outside of her, or whether your whole identity hangs on her approval. Here's the part men hate hearing. These tests don't stop after you win her. In fact, they often intensify. Because once she's committed, the stakes are higher for her biology. She needs to be certain she didn't settle for a man whose value will decay under pressure. Modern dating culture makes this even more brutal. Social media floods her feed with polished images of higher status men, wealthier, fitter, more charismatic. Most of them aren't real threats, but your brain doesn't get to choose how hers reacts. Attraction is comparative, and constant exposure to potential alternatives means you're always, in some corner of her subconscious, being measured. Fail enough of these silent tests, and you'll feel the drop. She becomes harder to impress. She laughs less at your jokes. She interrupts you more. None of this happens because she's become mean. It's her instincts recalibrating your rank. Freud saw this in a time before Instagram, before dating apps, before global exposure to endless alternatives. And if it was true then, imagine the amplified effect now. A single moment of perceived weakness can do more damage today than it could in an entire year back then. But here's the silver lining. Status isn't fixed. You can lose it and regain it. The key is understanding what keeps it alive in her eyes, and why appearing too secure in her approval can backfire. In the next section, we'll explore one of Freud's most unsettling claims, that the very closeness you think protects your relationship may, in fact, be the thing quietly dismantling it, because desire demands distance. If there's one line from Freud that still rattles people today, it's this: desire demands distance. On the surface, it sounds almost absurd. Distance? Isn't closeness the whole point of a relationship? But Freud argued that the very chemistry that fuels attraction doesn't thrive in constant proximity. It withers. The thrill of wanting someone is inseparable from the risk of not having them. Remove the risk entirely, and you tamper with the desire itself. Think about the early days of any romance. She's curious about you. She doesn't know exactly where she stands. There's a space between your worlds that her mind rushes to fill. That space is magnetic. It's charged with unanswered questions, with imagination, with possibility. But as time passes, you start sharing everything. Every thought, every plan, every habit. That charged space collapses into a seamless, predictable routine. And when there's nothing left to wonder about, there's nothing left to chase. Freud saw this not as cynicism, but as a function of human psychology. In his private writings, he compared it to art. A masterpiece loses its magic when you've examined every brushstroke under a microscope. The mystery is gone, replaced by familiarity, and familiarity breeds not contempt, but indifference. Modern relationships stumble into this trap all the time. Couples equate love with total transparency and constant access. Texting all day, knowing each other's schedules down to the hour, spending every spare moment together. It feels safe, it feels devoted, until one day you realize the sexual energy has flatlined. You've become companions, not lovers. Here's the paradox. The closer you are, the more your presence shifts from exciting to ordinary. In her mind, you stop existing in the realm of possibility and settle into the realm of certainty. And certainty is comfort, not thrill. You can see this effect even outside of romance. That restaurant you used to crave? Lose the craving if you eat there every night. That new gadget you were obsessed with? It's just part of your desk now. The novelty is gone. replaced by function. Freud's distance principle isn't about playing games or withholding affection. It's about maintaining a degree of separateness, your own life, your own pursuits, your own world, so that when you come together, there's still a gap to cross. That gap is where desire lives. In today's hyperconnected era, this is harder than ever. Technology has erased natural spaces of absence. You don't have to wait days for a letter or even hours for a call. You can check in instantly. But what we gained in connection, we've lost in tension. And tension, uncomfortable as it sounds, is the lifeblood of attraction. In the next section, we'll step into the modern dating arena, where apps and instant messaging have turned Freud's distance principle into a daily struggle, and where his warning feels almost prophetic. If Freud could see the modern dating landscape, he'd probably smirk and say, "Told you so." Because nowhere is his desire demands distance principle more visible than in swipe culture. Dating apps have turned human connection into an infinite scroll. Every profile is a potential what if, every match a spark of novelty. And novelty, as we've already seen, is the fuel for dopamine. The moment a match stops feeling mysterious, when you know their schedule, their quirks, their predictable conversation patterns, that dopamine spike fades. The app, on the other hand, offers an endless supply of fresh jolts. This has created a strange paradox. We live in an age with more potential partners than ever before, yet long-term attraction feels harder to sustain. Why? Because the modern environment constantly resets our novelty threshold. Even committed relationships aren't immune. Social media works like a low-grade dating app in the background, feeding the brain a steady stream of new. Freud's observation now plays out faster and more brutally. In his time, it might take months or years for the cooling phase to set in. Now, the digital world can erode mystery in weeks. Think about it. You start seeing someone, you follow each other online, and suddenly you're consuming each other's content daily. You know what they ate for breakfast, where they went with friends, what mood they're in. There's no gap for curiosity to live in. And yet, here's the cruel twist. The apps and platforms don't just kill mystery. They keep showing you alternatives. In the back of her mind, she knows that if the spark fades, the next potential high is just a swipe or DM away. That mental safety net weakens the instinct to preserve attraction in the present. For men, this creates a brutal test. It's not enough to be good. You have to stay compelling in a landscape where the baseline expectation is constant stimulation. And that's not natural for the human brain to maintain indefinitely. Which is why so many men find themselves blindsided. Things seem fine until one day, she's less responsive, less engaged, and suddenly, just not feeling it anymore. Freud couldn't have predicted dating apps, but his theory practically maps onto them. The chase is compressed, the conquest comes fast, and the novelty vanishes almost instantly, leaving a vacuum where desire used to be. In the next section, we'll explore what Freud called the masculine decay, how men, often without realizing it, contribute to this fade by dismantling their own allure once they feel secure in her affection. Freud warned that men often become the architects of their own downfall, not through betrayal or neglect, but through a slow erosion of the very traits that drew her in at the start. He called it a decay of the masculine frame. Here's how it happens. In the beginning, you're a force of movement. You have your own goals, your own friends, your own rhythm. She's drawn to the momentum of your life, the sense that she's joining a story already in progress. You're not waiting around for her to complete you. You're inviting her to orbit a world that existed before she arrived. But once you feel secure, once you think you've won her, that world starts shrinking. Without realizing it, you trade the man she met for a softer, safer version of yourself. You cancel plans more often. You lose track of personal goals. You put the relationship at the center of your identity. It feels like devotion, but to her instincts, it feels like loss. Biologically, attraction often hinges on polarity, differences in energy that create tension. When a man dissolves too much into the relationship, that polarity flattens. You go from the adventurer she admired to the ever-present companion she can predict without effort. And predictability, as Freud observed, is the enemy of sustained desire. Modern examples are everywhere. The gym rat who stops training once he's in a serious relationship. The ambitious worker who loses his drive after moving in with her. The social guy who gradually becomes a homebody because she's enough. On the surface, these look like signs of maturity. But subconsciously, they signal that the man she chose is slowly disappearing. Freud argued that women's attraction is deeply tied to the perception of a man's vitality, his ability to act, to lead, to remain self-sufficient. When that vitality dims, so does her pull toward him. And the tragedy? Men often make these changes believing they're deepening the bond, when in fact they're eroding the very energy that lit it. The solution isn't to be distant or aloof. It's to remain in motion. To keep building, striving, and existing as a full, autonomous individual. Not to create artificial scarcity, but to ensure that she never feels she's mapped you completely. In the next section, we'll examine what Freud called the invisible leash, how, once a man's vitality fades, the power in the relationship subtly shifts into her hands, often without either of you realizing it. Freud had a way of describing relationship dynamics that could strip away the romance and show you the raw machinery underneath. One of his most unsettling observations was what we might call the invisible leash. Here's how it works. In the early stages, the balance of power is fluid. You're both pursuing, both uncertain, both investing. But once you become the man who orbits her, once your life begins to center on her approval, that balance shifts. She no longer has to wonder if she can keep you. She knows. And that knowledge changes the way she relates to you, even if she'd never consciously admit it. Freud believed that this shift, when she feels complete security in your presence, gives her an unconscious sense of control. You've stopped being a challenge and started being a certainty. That's when the leash tightens. Not in an overt, controlling way, but in subtle shifts. She becomes quicker to criticize small things. She's less careful about impressing you. She assumes you'll adapt to her schedule, her moods, her needs. And because you've already made her the center of your gravity, you do adapt. Without protest. Without pushback. That's how the leash works. Not through force, but through your quiet compliance. The danger? Compliance without boundaries erodes respect. She might still care for you, but the dynamic has changed. You're no longer the man who could walk away if the connection stopped serving you. You're the man who will stay no matter how the dynamic shifts. That certainty removes the tension that keeps attraction alive. Modern culture often praises this as being a good partner, but Freud saw the shadow side. Relationships thrive on mutual respect, and respect is sustained when both partners retain some degree of independence and self-definition. Lose that, and you become, in her instincts, less of a partner and more of a possession. You can see this in couples where one partner, often the man, has settled in too deeply. The woman takes the lead in decisions, sets the pace of intimacy, and subtly dictates the emotional climate. It's not about dominance in a traditional sense. It's about who has the option to leave without devastation. Freud's invisible leash concept wasn't meant to breed paranoia. It was a warning. If you give up the very independence that made you desirable, you create a dynamic where her attraction has no fuel. In the next section, we'll explore the next phase in this shift. The moment you go from being an idol in her eyes to just another ordinary figure in her life, and how that moment often marks the beginning of the end for desire. Freud often said that familiarity is both the glue and the acid in human relationships. The same closeness that makes love possible can, over time, dissolve the very attraction that started it. He described a phenomenon that modern psychology sometimes calls devaluation through intimacy. In the beginning, your mystery, the parts of you she hasn't yet mapped, feeds her fascination. Every conversation, every glance, is a step into uncharted territory. You are becoming in her mind, not yet fully defined. But once she has enough data, your routines, your triggers, your vulnerabilities, her brain begins to shift you from the idol category to the known category. And the human mind treats the known with less awe. This isn't cruelty, it's wiring. Novelty excites us. Predictability reassures us. But reassurance alone doesn't spark desire. Freud saw this again and again in his patients. The man who revealed too much too soon lost his partner's curiosity. The man who made himself perpetually available lost his partner's urgency. The man who stopped growing outside the relationship became, in her eyes, smaller. Here's the unsettling truth. Even in love, attraction often thrives on a slight sense of distance. Not emotional coldness, but the awareness that your partner is still an individual, still evolving, still capable of surprising you. When that disappears, the emotional dynamic tilts. She stops looking up at you in admiration and starts looking across at you as someone predictable, ordinary, safe. You've moved from a figure of intrigue to part of the furniture of her life. Freud's patients would describe this shift in heartbreaking terms. I still care for him, but the feeling has changed. It's like I woke up one day and realized I knew exactly what he'd say before he said it. He's still the same man, but I'm not drawn to him the same way. It's not that you've done something wrong. It's that the spark that once came from uncertainty is now replaced by complete familiarity. And if there's nothing else, no ambition, no growth, no challenge, to reignite that spark, desire fades. Freud's advice, though couched in the language of his era, translates to this: never stop being a person she has to keep getting to know. Your evolution, whether in your work, your passions, your perspective, shouldn't stall just because you're secure in the relationship. Security without growth is the beginning of emotional stagnation. In the next section, we'll examine the psychological tipping point where admiration turns into quiet resentment, and why Freud believed this often happens before either partner even realizes the relationship is in danger. Freud noticed something chilling in his case studies. By the time resentment surfaces in words or arguments, it's already been living silently in the relationship for months, sometimes years. He described it as a psychological tipping point. At first, the woman's loss of admiration is subtle. She might simply stop praising you in front of others, or her laughter at your jokes becomes polite rather than spontaneous. Then, without conscious awareness, her internal narrative begins to shift. Instead of seeing you as the man she chose, she begins to see you as the man she settled for. This shift often happens without any dramatic event. It's not always betrayal, abuse, or a big mistake. It's the accumulation of tiny impressions. You no longer challenge her intellectually. Your habits have become predictable patterns she can map in her sleep. You stopped embodying the qualities that originally drew her in. Freud wrote that this phase is particularly dangerous because the woman doesn't always recognize it as resentment. Instead, she frames it as mild dissatisfaction, boredom, or just not feeling the same way anymore. But beneath that, her psyche is quietly rewriting your story from hero to burden. This is why so many men are blindsided when the breakup comes. They think things were fine because there were no constant fights. What they didn't realize is that the emotional connection had already been eroded by quiet disillusionment. Freud also observed that once a woman crosses this emotional threshold, she rarely reverses course without a significant shift from the man, something that shocks her perception and forces her to see him differently again. This could be a radical change in ambition, a surprising act of independence, or a reawakening of the qualities she once admired. But if the man responds to her withdrawal with only more pleading, self-pity, or passivity, he unknowingly seals the fate of the relationship. To her subconscious, this confirms her belief that the man she once admired no longer exists. The tipping point, then, is not about a single event but about a change in power balance. Freud framed it like this: when the idealized image collapses, affection alone cannot bear the weight of desire. The tragedy is that most couples don't recognize when this collapse begins, because the early signs are so easy to dismiss. In the next section, we'll explore Freud's controversial claim that, whether consciously or not, some women will begin to test their partner once admiration starts to fade, and how these tests often determine whether the relationship survives or dies. Freud's writings on testing were among his most disputed ideas, yet they were based on years of patient observations. He claimed that once a woman's admiration begins to wane, she will often, knowingly or not, initiate a series of subtle challenges designed to measure whether the man can reclaim her respect. These tests are rarely direct. They are not a clear, "prove yourself to me." Instead, they take the form of small provocations, boundary pushes, or changes in behavior designed to evoke a reaction. Freud believed these tests serve two unconscious purposes: to see if the man still has the strength and independence she was once drawn to confirm whether her emotional shift is justified or reversible. Some examples Freud described: she might make slightly mocking remarks about your ambitions to see whether you defend yourself with confidence or retreat into insecurity. She might forget to involve you in plans, observing whether you passively accept it or assert your place. She might compare you, lightheartedly or seriously, to other men, measuring whether you crumble under the comparison or remain unfazed. According to Freud, these moments are not merely mood swings or random attitude changes. They are stress tests of the relationship's hierarchy of value. If you meet them with quiet self-assurance and boundaries, the test can actually reignite her respect. But if you fail repeatedly, it accelerates the emotional withdrawal. Freud made an even more unsettling point. Once testing becomes habitual, she is no longer seeking to confirm your strength. She is seeking to confirm your weakness. In other words, the tests start as opportunities for reconnection but can transform into rituals of disillusionment. She no longer hopes you'll pass. She expects you to fail. For men unaware of these dynamics, the results can feel deeply unfair. They may feel they are suddenly walking on eggshells, not understanding that these tests are symptoms of a much deeper shift, the crumbling of admiration. Freud insisted that the key to surviving this phase lies not in becoming performative or trying to act strong in response, but in actually reclaiming the personal qualities that first made her respect you: drive, self-respect, emotional composure. Anything less will feel hollow and only further convince her that the man she loved is gone. In the next section, we'll examine what Freud called the final emotional withdrawal, the quiet stage before a breakup where she's still physically present but already gone in her mind, and why, by this point, most attempts to win her back fail. Freud described the final emotional withdrawal as the ghost stage of a relationship. Outwardly, the couple might still be sharing the same home, eating at the same table, or even maintaining physical intimacy. But inwardly, she has already stepped outside the emotional space they once shared. He noted that this phase is often misunderstood by men because it is marked by politeness. The arguments have died down. The overt testing has faded. She might even seem calmer, friendlier. To the unaware partner, it can feel like things are improving. In truth, Freud argued, this is a sign that the bond has already been severed in her mind. When the fire of conflict dies, it is not always because peace has returned. It is often because there is nothing left to burn. In this stage, her laughter no longer reaches her eyes. It's polite, automatic, but absent of real warmth. She stops asking for change. Once, she may have criticized or nagged about your habits. Now she lets them pass without comment. Not because she's accepted them, but because she no longer cares. Her body language closes off. She might sit further away, avoid lingering touch, or redirect affection toward friends, family, or even pets. Future plans disappear. There are fewer next month we should, or when we travel to conversations. The timeline of the relationship stops extending forward. Freud observed that by this point, attempts to win her back often fail because the emotional investment has already been reallocated elsewhere, toward her career, hobbies, friends, or another potential partner. He compared it to a tenant who has already packed their belongings and found a new apartment. You can repaint the walls and replace the furniture, but they're no longer thinking about living there. One of Freud's more controversial claims was that men, upon sensing this withdrawal, often make one of two fatal mistakes: desperation and overcompensation. Grand gestures, emotional begging, and promises to change. Counter-withdrawal. Becoming equally distant, cold, or resentful, which only confirms her decision. Instead, Freud argued that the only viable path forward in this late stage is not about convincing her. It's about genuinely rebuilding the personal strength and independence that can spark renewed admiration. This is not a guarantee, but without it, there is no chance. He warned. If she has already imagined life without you and found it lighter, quieter, or freer, you are already living in her absence, even while she sits beside you. In the next section, we'll look at Freud's unsettling view on post-breakup behavior, why the way a man handles himself in the weeks and months after her departure can either cement her low opinion or plant the seed for a reversal she never expected. Freud believed the period after a breakup was not an afterthought. It was the final chapter of a psychological process that often determined whether a woman's decision would remain permanent or, in rare cases, be reconsidered. He called it the confirmation window, a span of weeks or months where her mind subconsciously seeks evidence that leaving was the right choice. During this time, she is especially attuned to your behavior, not because she still wants you, but because the brain craves closure through validation. She will watch you more closely in your absence than she did in your presence. This is not longing, it is confirmation. Freud identified 3 typical patterns of male post-breakup behavior, each carrying its own psychological signal. The downward spiral. The man falls into visible despair, excessive drinking, neglecting his appearance, venting bitterness on social media, or obsessively contacting her. The signal it sends, I was right to leave. Without me, he collapses. Freud argued this outcome not only cements her decision, but retroactively reframes the entire relationship as one where she was the stabilizing force, and thus his absence feels like freedom, not loss. The instant replacement. The man quickly begins dating someone new, often in an attempt to provoke jealousy or mask his own pain. The signal it sends, my connection with you was replaceable. While some men think this inspires regret, Freud found it often triggers relief. She sees her emotional detachment as mutual, even if it wasn't. Worse, if the new partner appears less attractive or accomplished, it can create a sense of superiority that reinforces her original judgment. The control descent. The man quietly but visibly improves. Health, appearance, career, social life. No public dramatics. No hostile remarks. No visible pining. The signal it sends, I am not diminished without you. I am more. Freud considered this the only pattern that occasionally reactivates attraction, not because of manipulation, but because it disrupts her mental closure. He wrote, a woman cannot fully leave a man who continues to ascend, for the image of him she once knew becomes incompatible with the man he becomes. Freud emphasized that this controlled ascent must be genuine, not an act designed for her eyes. Women, he insisted, possess a near-instinctive ability to detect the difference between real transformation and posturing. Interestingly, Freud noted that even when this approach does not win her back, it redefines the breakup narrative, not as her rejecting you, but as her freeing you to evolve. In his view, this shift in power was the most important form of closure a man could achieve. In the next section, we will explore Freud's most uncomfortable assertion, why many women, consciously or not, test a man after the breakup, and how failing this unspoken examination can erase even the smallest chance of reconciliation. Freud's unpublished case notes reveal one of his most controversial theories, what he called the silent examination. According to him, many women, often without consciously realizing it, test a man in the weeks or months following a breakup. This is not the same as wanting him back. Instead, it is a subconscious audit, an instinctive curiosity to see whether the man they once knew reacts in a way that confirms her decision or challenges it. Freud wrote, the woman does not test with the hope of reunion, but with the hope of reassurance that the ending was the right course. Yet, should the results contradict her expectations, the seed of doubt is planted. These tests, Freud observed, usually fall into 3 categories. Indirect contact triggers. She might send a casual message, hey, found this old photo of us, or a question about something trivial. Do you remember where we bought that lamp? The real purpose is not to rekindle conversation. It is to measure your emotional temperature. A bitter, needy, or overly eager reply confirms her belief she left a man who can't manage his emotions. A brief, polite, and composed reply can confuse her certainty, not enough to draw her back immediately, but enough to make her reevaluate your stability. Social crossings, mutual friends, family gatherings, or accidental encounters at familiar places. Freud argued these moments are staged more often than coincidence would suggest. She is watching for visible signs: your posture, your laughter, your interactions with others. A man who avoids eye contact or appears withdrawn inadvertently signals that he is still emotionally bound to her. One who is cordial, self-assured, and socially engaged disrupts her post-breakup narrative. Provocation through image. Posting photographs or updates designed to spark a reaction, showing her in social settings with male friends or living an adventurous life. The intent is to see if you will respond, directly or indirectly, through comments, likes, or retaliatory posts. Freud called these emotional fishing lines. Reacting to them is like taking the bait. Ignoring them forces her to confront the fact that your attention has shifted elsewhere. What Freud found most fascinating was why women perform these tests. His conclusion was unsettling. It is not always love nor cruelty that drives the test. It is a desire to affirm one's irreplaceability. If she finds you diminished, she can rest in the comfort that she was essential to your life. If she finds you improved, she may wrestle with the quiet fear that she was the one holding you back. Freud's advice to men was blunt. Never play into the test knowingly. It turns genuine growth into performance, and performance is detectable. Never react to provocation. Silence and indifference are more disruptive than counterattack. Always let improvement speak for itself. Publicity cheapens progress. By maintaining authentic self-development and composure, a man passes the test without even appearing to take it. Freud believed this was the final stage of reclaiming one's dignity, and the only way to truly reverse the power dynamic of a breakup. In our conclusion, we will examine Freud's ultimate message, not about women, but about men, and why he believed that, in matters of love and loss, the true victory is internal. When Freud's private observations on relationships are read in full, a striking theme emerges. His focus was never purely on decoding women. It was on transforming men. He saw breakups, betrayals, and emotional disappointments not as endings, but as examinations of selfhood. In his words, the loss of another should never eclipse the finding of oneself. Throughout his career, Freud studied countless cases where men, after losing the woman they believed to be the one, either collapsed inward or rose beyond recognition. What determined the outcome, he concluded, was not the woman's actions, nor the fairness of the breakup, but the man's ability to confront three difficult truths. You are not entitled to be chosen. Love is not a reward for being good enough. People choose based on their own needs, timing, and desires, many of which have nothing to do with you. Your worth is independent of her opinion. A partner's rejection is not an objective measurement of value. A man who grounds his self-worth in another's validation will always be at their mercy. Self-respect is more magnetic than pursuit. Chasing validation after rejection erodes the very traits that inspire respect. Ironically, the moment a man genuinely stops needing her approval is often the moment she reconsiders him. Freud often spoke of emotional sovereignty, the ability to remain centered regardless of external events. He argued that the most desirable men, both to women and in society, were those who carried themselves as if they had something greater to serve than just their own romantic interests. He wrote, "The woman may be the muse, but she must never be the mission. The mission must be the man's own becoming." This is where Freud's ideas converge with an almost philosophical stoicism. Breakups, heartbreaks, and tests are all just sparks on the forge. If a man uses them to temper himself, physically, mentally, emotionally, he emerges with a kind of quiet power that no one can take from him. And here lies Freud's most subversive idea. The real victory after heartbreak is not making her regret, not winning her back, and not proving her wrong. It is reaching a place where her opinion no longer dictates the temperature of your soul. Because when you arrive there, calm, capable, and committed to your own path, you no longer need to pass her tests. You've outgrown the game entirely. Final note from Freud's perspective. If a man can look at the woman who once held his heart, smile with genuine goodwill, and continue walking without a shadow of longing or resentment, then, whether she knows it or not,
he has won.